Let's talk about the strategy on how to avoid fights in our family that sometimes happen. There are 4 things that actually are steps in a fight. The first one is it starts somehow. Generally, it is about somebody said something, somebody heard something, somebody told us something, and then the fire is lit, and then we start. The second phase is when a person starts to dwell on these negative feelings. Let's think about that. Let's say somebody discussed something negative about us, or we heard our siblings or our family, our parents talk something negative about us. Now what happens is, even if they're discussing something, and may necessarily be negative or positive, person internalizes all that information and starts to store it in his hard disk, in his brain. Now, the young child who is below adolescence, what he will do is he will throw a fit. He will immediately react and throw a fit, and he will say, "Oh, I need this, I need to do that," and he will weep and he'll cry and then he'll calm down. Now the older child or the older adolescent or young person, they will start to internalize all that information and they will start to think about it in very creative ways. There are 2 ways of thinking about this. Either we can be optimistic or we can be pessimistic. Now if the person takes the pessimistic route, he starts to dwell on it and it starts to boil internally as lava boils under a volcano that has not been activated yet. And then the person starts to develop a grudge internally, and in Islam, developing grudges and hatred eventually leads to negative outcomes. The third step is when a person starts to confront or start a fight. All that lava that was boiling, all those feelings that were being internalized that by a person, he starts to say, okay, let me find a way to vent those feelings, because there are so many now that they cannot be kept internally. So as a result, a headbutting takes place, a confrontation takes place, a fight takes place, a verbal exchange of negative feelings takes place. Now there are 2 scenarios. The first scenario is a person is very strong, so what he will say is, hey, if you are weak and you talked about me, I will talk worse about you, right? And if you said something, I will give it back to you and a bag of chips. And then there's another scenario in which a person is actually weaker than the person who he's fighting with. Let's say if you work in a company and your boss said something negative about you. Now you as an employee can't confront your boss, so what you will do will start having a grudge inside, and you will not, you'll avoid the confrontation. Let's say a younger sibling with his older sibling, what they will do is they'll start to avoid the older sibling because they can't get in a fight with them, they're stronger. So what they'll do is they will stop saying salam to them, they will stop being kind to them, they will avoid them. And in family feuds that actually are blown out of proportion, brothers and sisters, they don't even visit each other anymore. They don't even say salam to each other anymore. They don't even visit each other on Eid anymore. So what Shaitan has actually done, he's taken the human being step by step by step in a direction of what they call in Islam qati'atul rahim, which is to sever the family relationships. So it starts with the initial discussion, then the discussion becomes internalized, and a person starts dwelling on it, and he starts to obsess over it, and he starts to really go crazy internally. And then one day the volcano erupts with all those feelings that were stored for years, sometimes 6 months, 2 months, even 5-6 years, I've heard, when I was counseling people. So what happens then is that there are, confrontations, and eventually and finally the relationship is severed. Do you know the sin of actually severing the family ties? Do you know the sin of that? The Prophet ﷺ says, لا يدخل الجنة قاطع رحم, that a person who severs family ties will never enter paradise. The Holy Qur'an says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. We seek protection from shaitan or Satan, the accursed, with Allah. أن تفسدوا في الأرض وتقطعوا أرحامكم in Surah Muhammad verse 22. That you cause chaos on earth and you sever your family bonds. أولئك الذين لعنهم الله. Those are the people who Allah has cursed. فأصمهم وأعمى أبصارهم. So Allah made them unable to realize with their hearing and with their sight, meaning that even with their families being torn apart, they cannot hear the cries for help, they cannot heed the call for help and healing, and they cannot see what damage has already been done to their household. So therefore, we should avoid family feuds and fights by these simple steps. If somebody has said something, so what? Let's try to be kind with them, because the Prophet ﷺ was kind to his enemies and the enemies became his best friends. So inshallah, if you like these videos, please subscribe and give us your feedback in the comment section how this helped you. Inshallah, in the future, we hope to discuss more matters that will be helpful for the community at large.